Hi, everybody, and welcome to our fifth workshop, which is branches, chapters, and more. We're going to talk about, what is a chapter? Are you interested in creating a chapter? Interested in starting a chapter? This workshop will teach you how to do both. And in our panel, we have chapter leads of a big nonprofit organization. And our panel today is Charlotte from Masks for All, Massachusetts, and Louise from our very own MFACA. You guys can just do a brief introduction of yourselves, beginning with Charlotte.
I helped to start the Massachusetts branch of Mass for All CA. We've been going since last summer, so a while now. I helped grow our team, and I was mostly in charge of just kind of recruiting more people and working on finding grants. And
And I'm Louise. I started working with Masks for All CA in the spring as a fundraising officer. And then when we started to grow chapters, I took on the chapter liaison role. And so I've been working with all of our 5 remote chapters since last summer.
Okay, so I'm just gonna pause the recording here. I think I just have to reload this slideshow. So just give me a few more minutes. So sorry about that.
I can screen share the slides if that's easier.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I think I must have put it in the wrong slideshow or the wrong area. Would it be possible if you could screen share for this one, Louise?
Yeah, for sure. Here, I gotta plug in my computer first. Okay. Okay. You can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. And can you see the slide?
Yep.
Okay, great. So, as we talked about, we're going to be talking about remote chapters today, and I'm going to go through the who, what, where, when, why, and how, because I thought that would be an easy way to break up that information. So just to start simply, a remote chapter is something that brings your organization to a new, distant, physical place. And this is to expand your organization's reach to a new geographic area. For Masks for All, this means recreating our original SF chapter in other places, and we don't really have a lot of national infrastructure. That's essentially just kind of me. But other organizations are very nationally focused, and then they have unrelated chapters that might look pretty different from one another and might interact with each other more in different ways. A Sunrise Movement might be a good example of that, where they have a pretty big national hub, and then they have a bunch of local chapters as well, in contrast to our more decentralized approach. So that's kind of the way that it can look. And I gave you this basic definition in order to set up the question of why and when you should start one. So when it is appropriate and why it might be appropriate, because it is a big undertaking and you don't want to rush into it when you don't really have a clear idea of what your goal is for doing such a thing. So a good question to ask yourself if you're trying to figure out why you might want to start remote chapters is your organization's reach dependent on physical location? For Masks for All, this was definitely the case. We had people asking if they could volunteer from other parts of the state and other parts of the country, and it just doesn't make financial sense for us to be shipping materials back and forth with remote volunteers. And so we thought it might be a good idea to have remote chapters that would do all of that work in those places that there was interest. And then some good questions to ask yourself to determine when it might be appropriate in your organization's stage of development to undertake this. Could you easily recreate your org success? Do you have a formula that you can articulate to somebody in a pretty quick way that would then allow them to recreate what you did? And do you have a funding surplus? Do you have the money to put into something like this? And as for where, if you do decide that location is important and your operations are based on physical location and not just online, you should choose your new locations with care to maximize your reach so that each new opening has a big impact. And then who's going to start this with you, right? So you want to start it, and then you want to find people in these other places. And usually when you're recruiting people and you're a young person, you typically go by word of mouth, but that's a little bit more difficult because you don't live in that place. You don't go to high school with these people, etc. And so it can be a little bit daunting, but there are ways around it. But basically you want to look for the same type of people that you already have on your team and you already trust and enjoy working with. So to recruit by location, you can go through LinkedIn or Glassdoor and just put up job postings and see who applies. The people who regularly go through Glassdoor and LinkedIn for job postings are usually pretty driven people, very impressive. And you can also do targeted social media ads, like Instagram will let you do a social media ad targeted to a certain age demographic in a certain place. But really the best way to find people that are the best way to set up connections that are going to last are through pre-existing connections. So just people let you know, or a friend of a friend, and then they can refer you to somebody else, things like that. And then once you find a few people that are really interested, you're going to want to interview them to explain what they're getting into and explain what expectations are mutually, and also to learn more about them and see if you think that they would be a good fit. And then once you find people who are good fits and who are interested, they can help you recruit in the area because, again, they have all these personal connections within that geographic area. And so then once you have people who are interested, how do you build it up? So basically what you're going to want to do before doing this is writing up instructions for every single process and role that your organization currently has. So every single packaging instruction, every single job description, so that somebody can look at that information online and figure out exactly what to do. And of course, change it to fit themselves if that's also what you're going for. But, you need to have a basic level of information, basic level of instructions. And then it's also important to set a schedule or a timeline with the people that you've just recruited to launch the chapter, so that everything happens at once, right? You have the internet presence happening at once, and maybe they're making their first donation within a week, whatever makes the most sense. And then the most important thing really is continuing communication all the time, and also making sure that physical exchanges such as shipping products across the country happen in a timely manner. And this is the most challenging thing out of all of this, is just maintaining these relationships. And so that's what I'm going to continue to talk about later. And also it's really important to make all expectations absolutely clear from the forefront to avoid miscommunication and avoid anybody getting caught off guard with either the amount of work or the expectations that you have for them. And that's just, generally good workplace advice, but it's especially important here. And so what I did when we started was I set up a chapter starting kit, or I just kind of call it the chapter folder. And I shared it with everybody who was interested, just so that they could take a look and see exactly what was going down. So you can see here are all our financial documents that they might need to apply to grants or anything like that. Some paperwork that they might need, all the sample messaging for email templates, and then spreadsheets to track outreach and whatever, just all the things that you use as an organization, you want to make available. And then also some introductory things like some videos and slideshows. And then we had a sheet for a while, it's defunct now, where we tracked all the spending and all the revenue of all the different chapters. Now we kind of just do it more centralized. And then I'm going to go into some of these a little bit more in detail, but you can see there's a lot of guides here: financial, fundraising, media outreach, operations, and those are job descriptions. So I talked to everybody in our organization and I heard what they did, and then I typed up an explanation of it and included all the resources linked in the guides. So I'm actually going to end this presentation and kind of quickly go over a few of the more interesting documents. So here's our collaboration details doc, and that is basically our expectations. A lot of this is actually quite outdated, but it's important just to have a written up thing of quickly, like, this is what we are going to do, and this is what we hope you do. So that's communicated in writing very clearly. And then also this is like a general timeline, and obviously this is different for each launch, but you know, it kind of has like, okay, this is what we're going to do before launch, and then this is what we're going to do the first week after, the second week after, and then this is how we're going to sustain that type of production. And then the other really important one is the role description doc. And so this has the people that you're going to want to get it started, which are the leaders of this new chapter. And then they will be able to hire or recruit a bunch of other people who will work on their team, filling in all the basic roles that you have in your chapter or like your organization. And just an explanation of what they do. See here, I linked all the guide docs and also how they're chosen, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's a pretty quick overview. How do I stop share? Okay. That is a pretty quick overview of all of this to kind of prime us for the conversation that we're going to have about how that actually goes. So this is kind of all the theory behind it. Yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Louise, for that wonderful presentation. I just want to let everyone know if you do have questions, you're welcome to private message me. My name is Dahlia Deuce, and we're going to do our questions at the end after Charlotte speaks. Charlotte, do you have a presentation, or would you like me to just stop sharing screen and you can just talk? Oh, you're on mute.
I don't have a presentation though.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll just put gallery view. Here we go. And you can go ahead, Charlotte, and talk about your experience as creating a chapter and what are the difficulties that you've encountered, but also what are recommendations you have for people who are going to start something like that.
So yeah, I mean, everything kind of went down how Louise was explaining it. We started off with all those docs, and then I think recruiting people in the beginning was definitely kind of the most difficult part. Our method of reaching out to people was kind of, we started emailing like a lot of schools in the area to see if we could get like teachers or administrators to send out mass emails. So actually a lot of our volunteers initially came from BC because one of their like heads of community service out there sent out an email to, or it was a big post to the school. And yeah, I think it's kind of word of mouth was how we did it. I guess some of the difficulties is definitely just kind of being removed from the like California chapter, is like communicating and making sure that like fabric deliveries and everything like that is going well. Yeah, I think we honestly didn't struggle too much to find people who wanted to help lead. We definitely had a decent amount of volunteers that came through programs like Volunteer Match, which I think Mass for All CA had set up. And a lot of our money just came from things like GoFundMe. So like even if our volunteers wanted to donate some, we made sure to kind of always put that out there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. So we're starting to get some questions in the chat. Again, a reminder, you can ask questions, direct them to either Louise, Charlotte, or both Louise and Charlotte. So I'll start with the first one. This one's for Louise, I believe. How do you determine places to start chapters?
That's a really great question. Well, because we were a COVID-based org, we were focusing on places with the worst COVID cases. But also we wanted to maximize your reach, you're going to want to focus on big cities. And so we primarily looked at major metropolitan areas. And also, a focus on the places that we were hearing about in the news as having bad COVID cases, in order to really maximize the good that opening that chapter would do. And so we spent a lot of time actually focusing on New York City and Florida. And New York City didn't end up panning out, but we do have a good Florida branch, which is doing a lot of great work. And so those were kind of two key factors for us, but it would depend on what your org is trying to do, who you're trying to help. But regardless, like unless you're a rural based org, you're probably going to be looking for a city, because that's the easiest way to it's the most population dense area if you're trying to reach the most people.
Thank you so much, Louise, for that answer. Another question, I guess this could be both for Louise and Charlotte. Is it better for branches to be mainly independent from the main organization or more dependent from the organization?
I mean, I would say it's kind of like a happy medium. You can't really completely remove yourself, because you want to be communicating with the California chapter about funding and fabric and everything like that. But like aside from that, you kind of have to function on your own. And I think each chapter kind of we function mainly in the same way, but everybody has their little differences of ways that they want to keep track of volunteers and deliver fabric and things like that.
Yeah, and a happy medium is pretty difficult to find. It took some trial and error. But it also depends on how interconnected the work that you do has to be. So because we were making masks, all the volunteer stuff, that can all just be managed locally. But if you're doing larger campaign type of work, maybe you need more interdependence. It really, I think, depends on what your end goal is.
Yes, thank you so much for that answer too. I completely agree. It's, that medium is really important, but finding it can take some time. Practice makes perfect. Um, this question is also for both of you guys, but whose job is it to get funding for the branches? And how would you get funding for the branches?
So I am the head of communications, so that's kind of my job. But there's also people, I work with a group of people. I think there's 4 of us who are kind of constantly looking for grants and applying to grants that could apply to making masks and things like that. So I guess the head of communications is kind of the top of that, but then there are fundraising officers too. And I guess even our social media officer had a big part in getting people to donate.
Yeah, and in terms of a national chapter split in funding, that's really a conversation that I totally forgot about and that you do definitely need to have before you start opening chapters, is how are we going to manage this? Is it going to be completely centralized? Is it going to be kind of localized? And we've kind of tried to find a happy medium in that as well, in that we have to collect all the money into one bank account, right? Because we have one fiscal sponsor. And then we try to reallocate that money back into the chapters towards, making sure that everybody is able to function, and then also putting more money towards the chapters that are consistently bringing it in, because it would be kind of unfair if we weren't. That's kind of a constant conversation. It's constantly in flux. I would actually suggest coming up with a very concrete financial plan before starting, for that reason. And also, but yeah, I think it's important to have some type of centralized funding so that you can make sure that everyone stays functioning, everybody has the materials that they need. But then also, if a chapter collects money on a GoFundMe, they should just keep that. But yeah, that's a conversation that you need to have beforehand and throughout.
Yeah, so we got a follow up on that question. Louise, could you expand a little bit more on the one fiscal sponsor thing?
Yeah, so the main reason why we have chapters and not just kind of giving resources to help people start their own thing is because if we work as one organization together, they can also have the same fiscal sponsor that we do. And that allows all of us to work with IRS approval. And I think the fiscal sponsor workshop is happening later today, right? And so that, wait, let me think about this for a second, how to word this. Yeah, so because we have a fiscal sponsorship, they manage all of our revenue. They have our bank account essentially as a subset of their bank account. And so they receive all of our revenue and they do all of our spending for us. They are essentially, their accountant is our accountant. And so because we are all operating as one organization, all of our money has to go through that bank account and through that accountant before being spent again. So that is kind of the constraint of having chapters instead of just a bunch of organizations that act and operate similarly to one another and are perhaps in communication with one another. But it's also the benefit, you know, that everyone can apply for these large grants.
Yes, and a reminder, we will be having a fiscal sponsor workshop today at 1 p.m. Pacific time. I know that there has been issues with the daylight savings, but I'll send an email, just a reminder on that. I think we have a few more questions. Were there any branches that didn't pan out? And if so, what were the issues? I guess that's for Louise.
We had some people apply. We had somebody from Colorado and somebody from South Carolina, a couple people from each apply to start one. And then upon interviewing and upon speaking with them, it was just kind of like, okay, like this time commitment isn't really going to work out. So it's probably best if we don't go through with this. And we did have a chapter in New York that didn't pan out. And that was really because of miscommunications and like workplace issues. And it definitely taught me a lot about how to manage workplace problems in a better way and also how to set expectations in a better way, which I think is also just an important part of personal development. But that's why I always put an emphasis on setting expectations and communicating expectations clearly and early on. And that's why I highly recommend that if you choose to go through with this, because otherwise, you know, you just kind of end up in a worsening situation.
Well, with that, I think that's the perfect note to finish up our workshop. Thank you everybody for attending. We are finishing a little bit early, but that's okay. Just a reminder that we do have 2 more events this weekend. We have a fiscal sponsorship and tax nonprofit status workshop at 1 p.m. that I'll be leading. This is the perfect, you know, final workshop because once you have everything planned out and you want to take your organization and your nonprofit to the next level, then you go looking for a fiscal sponsor. You go looking for that status that will elevate everything to be a lot more opportunities open up. So highly recommend attending that workshop. We do also have a closing workshop at around 5 p.m. This workshop is just a presentation of the soon-to-be ultimate toolkit, gathering what everybody said in our panels this weekend and giving you the resources to be able to start your own charity organization and nonprofit. With that, thank you so much, Charlotte and Louise. And I hope everybody else has a great rest of their day. Bye.
Thank you.